Hello, how are you doing today? My name is Judith. I will be speaking today about identity of self, relationships, and autism spectrum disorder. So, we know that identity in non-autistic individuals is something that is formed in us almost automatically. We have understanding also of the levels of authority that exist in the family unit. We know that mom and dad are have authority over us, and so we take their guidance, their education. And then also we know that there are consequences when it comes to our actions and what we do. There are good consequences or bad consequences for our actions. Now, when it comes to the autistic individual, the child comes into the world and is autistic. He or she does not automatically develop an identity or sense of their parents' authority over them. As the autistic child starts to grow older, and in an attempt to communicate with others, he or she may adopt the method of speaking through patterns of identity. And basically these patterns of identity are members of the family. So mom or dad can be a pattern of identity, but also the siblings, cousins, or friends when the child starts to go to school. So then the levels of authority that should exist, as dad having authority over the child, mom having authority over the child, and then the siblings, depending on the age of the siblings, each one having authority one over the other when it comes to siblings. The eldest, of course, having authority or a level of authority over the younger ones, and so on. And this is something that was done in the past, in families in the past. Maybe not now. It's not done. This is maybe something new to you, but it wasn't back then. Back then, the father had authority over everyone, including mom, and mom was also authority, but in conjunction with dad. And then the children within the siblings, they are all under the authority of dad and mom. But then also the siblings had, the eldest had the authority over the younger siblings. And so that is what was before. Usually those who are children who are not autistic, almost automatically they form the identity of self, having understanding of self, responding from self as their own individual, and also knowing that they belong to a family group that has different levels of authority to follow. For those who are non-autistic, that is the situation. But for autistic children, the situation is that the child is not forming identity of self, and then the child is not taking into consideration the levels of authority that should exist. And why is that important when it comes to relationships? Well, the child is not assimilating, the autistic child is not assimilating that there is levels of authority and that there is a place in the family for everyone. That's the order that should be followed. The verbal autistic child will learn to follow patterns or to identify as patterns of identity from within his home. And basically that is the way that he or she will communicate, using the patterns of identity. Now, the way that they are using these patterns of identity is that at a moment that the child deems that he or she needs to use an identity, depending on the circumstance and situation, he or she will either become, in his or her mind, imagining at the moment being that pattern of identity, taking over that pattern of identity. So if it is a male and there is a circumstance where he needs to use an identity and the identity of mom is most appropriate for him to use, that child is not going to use only the skills of conversation that mom has, but the entire identity. So that child comes in, and in his mind, he will become mom. In his mind, he will become a female. In his mind, he will deal with matters just as mom does, believing he is mom. So when it comes to also using an identity pattern for a circumstance and situation that will require an identity that is close to dad, then the child will do the same, and he will associate himself to that identity and he will behave in that way. Of course, there is a clash when the real identities come about and that child have to deal with mom and dad, because he's interchanging between mom and dad. And so there is a clash when mom is talking to the child who believes he's mom or who believes he's dad. So then the understanding of that level of authority doesn't exist in the child. He doesn't, in his mind, he's not a child, he's mom, and he also dad, whatever he's switching. And some autistics, they may say, well, I am acting. But in reality, when you are acting, you know that you are whoever you are, and that you're only doing something to play around or to do some act, whatever it is. But it's not as in the movies, because when someone goes into character, that person knows that he is who he is, and he is only doing this as an act. Those who are autistic are not just doing it as an act, but as a way of interacting with others, and starts in the family unit. So the child is not a child. In his mind, he is this adult woman who is titled mom, or he is this adult man who is titled dad, or he is a child, but he is a child as a sibling. So he exists in these different types of identities, never taking charge of his own identity and existing in his own identity. And so this is associated with a type of dissociative identity disorder. And so my name is Judith, and I'm Judith, and I'm having understanding that I'm Judith. And whenever I speak, and I know that whenever others are listening, they are listening to what I am saying or what me, Judith, is saying. My thoughts conveyed out through my mouth, which is the tool that I have in order for me to voice out what is in my mind. So I have understanding of that. But if I start using patterns of identity and start believing that I'm someone else at the moment in order for me to transmit my thoughts using someone else's identity as pattern to follow, then, and I am identifying as that person, believing that I am at that person at the time that I'm doing that, then that is called depersonalization and also derealization. Because if I am under the impression and thinking and believing that I become someone else at the time, and I am like in a trance in that, then I am making myself believe something that is not real, that is not true. So it is derealization because of that, and it's depersonalization because I am omitting myself. I am making myself as non-existent and acting as someone else, but also believing that I am that other else. So then it is a dissociative identity disorder. I am dissociating myself, following someone's identity pattern, following that pattern, becoming that person. So this depersonalization and dissociation of self, derealization, can be remediated by having constant reminder of who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to use my speech, how I'm supposed to work in order for me to practice to bring my thoughts forward to my mouth, to speak it out, and having understanding, having knowledge and discernment that whenever I speak out, people are not saying, well, this person is identifying as this person or as this other person or as this other person, or this person is repeating things because she's autistic or he's autistic. The one on looking to me, speaking out, is saying that whatever my actions are, whatever my mouth say, is what Judith believes. And basically that's what it is. Because we are not someone else's identity, we are our identity. So mom behaves this way, I can also choose to behave the same way. Mom behaved this way, I can choose not to behave that way. Mom knows this skill, I can choose to learn the same skill. And then mom will have that skill, and also me, I will have that skill. Dad will have the skill, I also can learn to have that skill. So it will be mom's or dad's identity knowing how to do something, and also me. That's the way it should be. That's the appropriate way. So having constant reminder, and this is parents are responsible for this type of skill training in regards to cognition, in regards to understanding, discernment, and consciousness, which autistic individuals need more much more than a regular child, a regular non-autistic child. So it's not that the autistics are irregular, but in their way of being different. That's what I meant by that. So we also have to understand that all humans have free will. We are all unique individuals. So it is important that children are guided in how they're going to use their free will. That there are levels of authority within relationships. There are levels of authority within relationships in the family, with friends, and in the business world. And when it comes to the principles of authority, it should be that is based or founded on spiritual guidance. Why that is important? Because parents are the ultimate authority then if there's no spirituality involved. If there's nothing to hang on that authority levels, when the child becomes a teenager, he or she will have better understanding of who the parents are, what type of parents they are, what ways they are, and that child will either like or dislike his or her parents. But having that foundation, having that authority founded in the spiritual matters, then everyone is accounted to a higher being. Parents are accounted to God, and God has given the parents the assignment of rearing their children with basic principles to follow, that everyone should follow. But what if the parents don't follow those principles, or don't have any values or principles that they specifically follow that are related to spirituality? Then it is going to be very difficult for any child to have understanding of the levels of authority. Because if the most high authority is failing in some way or corrupted in some way, then what else is the child going to turn to? But if the levels of authority are based on the spirituality, spiritual guidance, spiritual principles, then everyone is accounted. The parents are responsible and have an accountability to God for the rearing of the child. If they don't meet whatever they're meeting, then they'll have to answer God for that, for whatever they're doing or whatever they didn't do. And then in relation to the child or children, they are also accountable to God and responsible for following the good guidance that it's offered through the parents' guidance, education, and punishment, which is discipline. So what if the parents are abusive or something else? Well, that is a different circumstance. And of course, in any case, there's social workers and there's the authorities that we can turn to in order to resolve those matters when it comes to physical abuse of any type, of neglect or whatever else that a child needs that is not getting. But I am speaking in the form or in regards to when the family unit is there, complete. That the child will feel secure, protected, cared for as he is born and grows into adulthood. Of course, there are circumstances that didn't permit that parents were present, or one of the parents were not present for whatever reason, and then of course the circumstances will vary on that. But when we use the levels of authority based on the spiritual basis, then we know that every one of us is accountable. Parents are accountable to God. Children are accountable to God. So everyone is accountable. If parents are not doing their part or whatever they're doing in order for them to accomplish whatever they need to accomplish in regards to their children rearing, then they're accountable to God. So levels of authority will be based on spirituality will have better results, and you see better results in those families who apply the spiritual guidance and principles in their lives. Now, when it comes to relationships outside the family, how is the child or human who is autistic relating to others? Well, they're using the same family patterns that they have been using in order for them to communicate within the family. So, in the situation where the child may need to speak in a certain way about certain matters, that child will use the pattern of mom or the pattern of dad, depending on the circumstance, or the pattern of a sibling if he's talking to other children who are teenagers. Even if they are adults, they will use the pattern that they see fit to speak of when it comes to different groups. So it could be that he's an autistic adult, but that autistic adult is speaking to a teenager, so then he will assimilate himself to a sibling and he will speak to that teenager as if he was a teenager also, in that same literal way. So it won't be like, I am an adult, okay, I'm an adult speaking to a teenager. It won't be that way. And the same way is when it comes to in business, at work, they will use these patterns for those who are verbal autistic individuals. They'll grow into adulthood doing this, and the way that they are using the patterns of identity is in the literal way that they exist. So if it's the autistic child or autistic adult, he will communicate using an identity pattern, and let's say for the circumstance that exists or the situation that exists, that person wants to use mom identity. So he will identify as mom. He will believe his mom in his mind, believe he's a female, and believe he's mom. He will speak to that individual, whoever it is, as if mom was speaking to that individual. And so that is the way that they use to communicate. And of course, as I mentioned, this is a type of dissociative identity disorder. And how I mentioned also that the way that these individuals are helped is for them not to be just left to whatever, for them to guess how things are, but for them to be explaining to them the levels of authority that exist. Mom and dad, what are their roles, how each member of the house have their own individual identity, and how we should use our own identity and learn to express our thoughts through our mouth. Then also having practice sessions, practice speaking. If you have to say this, how will you say it? From your own thinking, from your own identity, not as identifying as mom. Because this is something that is formed, this use of patterns is something that autistic individuals do already as a form of communication. So they have to be helped in order to use their own character. They're forming their own pattern and their own way of communicating, but they have to be helped. For children who are not autistic, this comes automatically. Automatically they form their identity, automatically they start making relationships, automatically they realize mom and dad have authority over me. For children who are not autistic, that is almost automatically. For children who are autistic, it's not. They must be taught. So next week I will be talking in regards to communication and how we communicate, the types of communication that exist, and how autistic individuals are affected by it. Thank you for watching.